Well, it's been months now since the racially charged events in Ferguson, Missouri. And while the discussions about what happened are still fresh and ongoing, we thought it'd be a good idea to have what we're calling courageous conversations about race relations. We're sure here at KOLR 10 that you've likely had several conversations on Ferguson. Some of you have probably discussed it on social media as well. We wanted to dig a little deeper and, without trying to offend anyone, see what we learned about our country and ourselves.
Why was Ferguson so polarizing? Why did it divide our country along racial lines once again?
I think all the inequality and the injustice had simmered in Ferguson for so long that it was kind of like a powder keg that just exploded.
You have one of those moments in America where we are reminded of how stark the polarity is between the way the African American population saw that event and the way many white Americans saw that.
In Ferguson, an unarmed black male, Michael Brown, is shot and killed by a white officer, Darren Wilson. What really happened that day in August is still a matter of heated and emotional debate.
There's a lot of talking but no listening. And this case here exploded, evidently just touching the fever at the right time.
Investigations began, a grand jury convened. No matter what nugget of news came out, nobody listened to one another. Cable TV debated the smallest details endlessly. Social media exploded with conflict.
Things spin out of control very quickly with inaccurate, incomplete information or just flat out bogus information.
Everyone knew about Ferguson. If you'd never heard of Ferguson, Missouri, you did after a couple of days.
Ultimately, Officer Wilson is cleared of wrongdoing. So why did Ferguson set America back and reopen scars? Some called Michael Brown a thug who disrespected the law. Darren Wilson was a cop fighting for his life.
It's always been a dangerous profession.
Really was not the ideal young black man that they thought they would like to make out he was.
Others saw the vestiges of historical racism reignited.
The perception of many black people was that justice is not going to be done. Justice won't be done when there's a situation involving a cop and a black person.
All too often, there are these tragic situations occur which seem to the African American community to demonstrate that nothing much has changed.
Race relations, a black-white issue, is not something we have resolved or probably ever going to resolve in your or my lifetime. And we tend to, we make inroads, and we've made progress in that, but it is still an underlying issue in the United States.
This is what democracy looks like!
And the issue erupted on the streets of Ferguson. Riots, looting, military-style police, tear gas. It quickly ignited a national debate while the world watched on live TV.
Amazingly, there was no loss of life in Ferguson during the protests, no loss of life during those first days of the rioting in August, and no loss of life after the grand jury announcement in November. But what loss did our country endure?
We don't remember history well. I think for white Americans, we are quick to say, well, we dealt with that stuff. For African Americans, all too often, they have forgotten the legacy of people like Rosa Parks, who responded to pure evil with resolve and with graciousness, and paid a price that subsequent generations have forgotten.
Now that Ferguson has passed, other incidents continue to reignite these strong passions. The fatal chokehold of a black man by police in New York. The fatal shooting of a teen by Cleveland police pointing a toy gun made to look like a real gun.
But 40 years ago, I had the talk with my sons to tell them how they were to act when they were stopped by the police. I have a grandson who will be 21 this year. 40 years later, I'm still giving that same discussion because I want them to come back home to me at night.
In some ways, it's frustrating that people are doing around the country what they accuse officers of doing all the time, which is generalizing and taking an incident or a particular person and saying that's how everybody is. You know, we guard against that in law enforcement, say everybody deal with each situation differently and don't overgeneralize because someone looks or acts a certain way.
Did any of our discussions on Ferguson move America forward? Did any of us stop and think about our viewpoints, our mindsets?
It's easy to go out here and march and demonstrate and shut down the freeways, you know, but going to work, dealing with the public policy issues, engaging people in your community, but how can we find a way to get past, you know, the bias? How do I recognize the fact that I'm biased and accept that so that I check how I react?
How we react will determine our future.
We'll have to work at it at both ends. We'll have to work on it from the blacks, prejudice against whites, and the whites against black, because it cuts both ways.
There is no doubt that events like Ferguson remind us that we have unfinished business.
You have to continue to have hope, because if you take away hope and a dream, you have nothing. You have nothing left. So what does that say for our nation?
It's easy to talk about race, but much harder to find solutions. All this week and next, we hope to get from the talking to the acting stage.
That's right. We'll introduce you to some people who will share ways on how to begin a courageous conversation. Law enforcement is tasked with serving and protecting the public, and it's a job that's become increasingly challenging in recent months. Officers have faced growing scrutiny after tensions between police and the public escalated since the unrest in Ferguson.
As part of our courageous conversations about race relations, Color 10's Linda Ong looks into what the job of a police officer is like today.
Day and night. -1. Officers patrol the streets to keep communities safe. What they often enter are uncertain situations.
Your plate check. You're always thinking, arriving to a call, what are my options? You know, what if this happens? What if that happens?
Corporal Mark Chamberlain of Webster County has worked in law enforcement for 24 years.
Back when I first started, it was rare that you would get attacked by somebody. Now it seems it's an everyday occurrence.
It's a challenge faced by counties, both big and small. Springfield Police Chief Paul Williams.
It's always been a dangerous profession. It's always dealing with those people that nobody else wants to deal with in society.
In 2014, 126 law enforcement officers died in the line of duty, a 24% increase from 2013. 2 of those officers were from Missouri. One was Cedar County Deputy Matthew Chisholm. Sheriff Leon D. Rocati considered Chisholm family.
It's a loss that you don't really recover from, because you think about this stuff day in and day out.
The unrest of Ferguson reignited tensions between the public and police. Officers now must couple protecting the public with protecting their own from being a target.
Don't do things in a routine pattern, you know, change it up.
Rocati says since Ferguson, the public's perception of officers has taken a turn for the worse.
The respect for law enforcement is lost. We're in a losing battle.
It's frustrating that people are doing around the country what they accuse officers of doing all the time, which is generalizing.
When a crisis hit, we just revert back to what's comfortable for us or what our biases have taught us about other folks. And so it's easy to sort of grab onto those and say, you know what? That's the problem.
Wes Pratt is part of a group aiming to improve diversity and community relations in Springfield.
You have to have the trust of the community in order to effectively fight crime.
Pratt says part of the puzzle is understanding cultural differences. He's done this type of training with cadets at the request of the Springfield Police Department. Despite the best in training, officers are human and judgment can still fail.
Every now and then a cop will do something that doesn't exercise the best judgment. You don't blame the entire police department, nor should the police department blame every citizen because of some transgression or some criminal act of somebody in that community.
Williams believes key to trust is for officers to be engaged with the community.
And unfortunately, policing, that's what we tend to do. We're there when bad things happen and people are upset. If you have open dialogue and build relationships with folks before something like that happens, then there's a conduit to to sort that out and get to the facts.
Pratt says the way forward will take time.
We have to continue to work together, build that common bonds and common awareness and appreciation for one another in order to make sure that our community remains a safe community.
We in law enforcement still are human, and we try to help them out to stay equal with them. But if the public will work with us and help us, we'll do the best we can to help them.
Both the Cedar County Sheriff and Springfield Police Chief said they're trying to increase diversity in their departments.
Chief Williams encourages the public to go on ride-alongs and attend the Citizens Police Academy. He says this will give people insight into what police do.
Recent events about race have prompted people in cities across America to take a closer look at race relations.
That's certainly true here in Springfield, and as part of our Courageous Conversations series, KOLR 10's Matt Lupoli speaks with locals for perspective on progress and the realities at play here at home.
In a city celebrating a renaissance of sorts, where 100-year-old buildings are new again, some say blight of our past still needs attention.
They can refurbish all the buildings on the square that they want to, but as far as new blood and new growth in our community, we don't have it. Even white people, when they come here, they're like, wow, it is so white.
It's impossible to talk about how things are in Springfield now and what's led to that without going back in history.
In April 1906, there was a very public lynching in Park Central Square. And at that particular point, the city of Springfield was about 30% African American. And those were professional people. They would be what we would call today middle class. Now, obviously, that was a segregated society, but they were middle class. They were doctors. They were grocery store owners.
History shows Springfield's African American population plummeted in the early 20th century.
We had 30% to about 2 or 3%.
Suffering a diversity drought since.
This is American history. Let's be real.
But why did racial terror in Springfield's past affect its ethnic makeup for more than a century, while other areas of the country seem to move on?
It's not so much racism, it's our economic system.
Job opportunities, economics.
The whole attitudinal thing and reputation of Springfield. We build these walls and we put up, systems. They may kind of be under the radar systems, but they are there. We do things to kind of keep things status quo and keep things as they are. It was, nearly another 100 years before you saw people going onto school board, Charlotte Harden, or Denny Wayne becoming a councilman here in town.
I wore out 3 pairs of shoes, walking door to door, knocking on people's doors.
No doubt, progress has bridged gaps over the last several decades. The Springfield public school system seen as a beacon of faith in the future.
With almost 1 in 5 children in Springfield public school system now that is not white, you have to be strategic. You have to be budget conscious in supporting those students and their families and truly engaging them as partners in the educational process.
A recently unveiled plan by the superintendent to focus on learning equity, providing a possible solution to the perception of a currently imbalanced equation.
It could be a great school district, but then there are a lot of problems there, because I go on the south side, I would think I'm falling from another planet. North side is totally different. When you go on the south side, you may find a classroom with 18 or 19 and 4 kindergartens. You come on the north side, you may find 25 to 30 in a classroom.
But locals who've loved to call the Ozarks home for decades, some their whole lives, say slow but steady progress proves the Queen City's real potential.
That's one of the reasons I stay, is that I see the potential. It's home for sure, but I see the potential here for it to be so much more.
I wish that other minorities, especially black minorities, would choose to get involved in the city politics. They got to get more representation. First of all, they got to go to the polls and start voting.
Instead of speaking up and addressing issues, laying back and just, because that's what not Jesus would not do that. Jesus would speak out. Just love who you are. And when you love who you are, then you can love other people.
The City of Springfield's Race Faith Collaborative, which is a coalition of city employees, activists, and religious leaders, promotes a deeper understanding of race relations and equality. For more information about that group, look for information in this story on our website, Ozarks First.
For the rest of this month, we're having courageous conversations centered on America's race relations.
Blacks and whites still often wrestle with a peaceful coexistence and mutual acceptance. Still, and looking back through history, race has been at the center of some of our country's most pivotal moments. Here's David Oliver with more on our special series.
From the time of America's earliest settlements, blacks were treated as property, bought and sold like livestock. Freedom came after the Civil War, but the freedom they enjoyed was not the same as white Americans. Blacks continued to live in separate societies. Their children attended separate schools. Jim Crow laws soon mandated the segregation of schools, public transportation, restrooms, drinking fountains, restaurants, and the military branches. Separate but equal was really separate and unequal. It wasn't until 1954, just 60 years ago, when the High Court ordered schools to be integrated. Landmark legislation in the 1960s outlawed Jim Crow laws and barriers to voting. Violence soon characterized the nonviolent efforts of the civil rights movement in many historic confrontations. Central High in Little Rock, the 16th Street church bombing in Birmingham, Bloody Sunday in Selma.
The kind of stark evil represented in the white faces that pejoratively and angrily lashed out at black. Frankly, I saw that as pure evil coming, I would say, crassly from the pit of hell. And that sort of thing not only doesn't please God, but it does, even if you don't believe in God, you can't hope to have a nation that can thrive with that sort of darkness.
And the fight against discrimination would move from the streets to the courtrooms. Soon, righting the wrongs of the past would fall on America's baby boomers. Court-ordered busing meant kids couldn't go to schools in their own neighborhoods. They were bused across their own cities, or in some cases to nearby county schools, to bring racial balance. Affirmative action meant minorities were given preference for jobs over whites. Racial quotas were the norm for everything from employment to college applications, even scholarships. But in the late 1970s and 80s, there was a backlash. Courts began to back away from these controversial remedies, and the massive divide over race relations seemed bigger than ever.
The 1992 LA riots erupted when LAPD officers were acquitted for the beating of Rodney King. The not guilty verdict of O.J. Simpson divided our country. More recently, the shooting in Ferguson of a black teenager by a white police officer. The chokehold death of a black man by a white NYPD officer.
Because we don't talk to one another, because we live in the present moment without remembering the legacies of the past, we tend to repeat the mistakes. We act as if this is a solved problem. It is not a solved problem.
You know, there is such a climate now, people yelling at each other. I mean, and you know, some people say it may have started with the sports shows or whatever it is, the talk show, the talking heads. They want to argue, they want to blast each other, you know, and say negative things as opposed to engaging in a comprehensive, intelligent conversation.
I'm surrounded by people in the community who, you know, are not only were part of that, but live through that on both sides of those issues and still have a lot of heartburn over it and can't let it go.
There is no doubt that events like Ferguson remind us that we have unfinished business.
Our kids, it's not going to be an issue, I don't think, because they are not growing up in an environment of racial divide and black and white. They see some of these things, and I think they go, what on earth is going on? How come you people act that way?
Yeah, we've got friends and relatives, and we all do. You know, if they say something derogatory about someone who is from a different racial or ethnic background or religious background, they will say something derogatory, but we won't challenge them on it. We won't, you know, we so long go along to get along.
So many of them have such a closed mind that there's not much you can say to them without starting a fight. You know, it's something that they have to develop. They have to grow out of their own families and their own homes.
That kind of evil, that kind of hatred cannot sustain a civil society.
If I really get to know you, I'm going to get to know some of your pain and some of your anguish and some of your weaknesses and your frailties and your vulnerability. A lot of people don't like to deal with that. If I show you who I really am, you got to accept me. And sometimes it's difficult for me to be vulnerable enough, for you to be vulnerable enough to share who you are, because it makes us nervous to talk about race or difference, and that's the challenge.
Sometimes you just have to put your money where your mouth is. You know, and we can have all the conversations in the world, but if there are no action plans coming out of these conversations, then it's going to be business as usual.
Our world needs to have these kinds of civil discussions. Our community needs this. We can't live in unrest. We can't pass this on to subsequent generations.
Courageous conversations with you this past week on KOLR 10 and KOZL on race relations in Springfield and the aftermath of Ferguson. Many have been on social media outlets like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But with weighty topics like Ferguson and race relations, is social media the best way to carry on a courageous conversation? We wanted to share some Springfield voices with you that have concerns about social media and whether it hurts or helps.
Ferguson was handled in such a way with the media that it went everywhere, with the internet, Facebook.
Social media, in my estimation, has not contributed to the civility necessary for the kinds of in-depth discussions that have to happen in this hundreds of years long issue we've had in America. You don't deal with it in tweets, you don't deal with it in slogans, you deal with it eyeball to eyeball. And social media allows anonymity, social media allows cynicism and snarkiness to rule the day. It becomes an art form, and subsequently, it, in my estimation, gives us consciousness, it raises consciousness, but it doesn't help contribute to what is really necessary.
Things spin out of control very quickly with inaccurate, incomplete information or just flat out bogus information, and people trying to fan the flames of something like that.
You don't have all the facts. Nobody has all the facts yet. You know, let's have, let's not say anything until we can get all the facts. And then if you identify issues that are problematic, let's be willing to address every one of those issues.
We're not getting at the issues as much as we should, but you're kind of faced with how do you get a hold of this greased pig, and wrestle with it when you really want to. But if there's no big issue, you don't start a fight in order to have an issue.
It's easier, to throw stones as opposed to try to engage in those conversations and do your research. And it doesn't take a whole lot because it's right there at your fingertips.
But please do not keep parroting that 20 years ago, 50 years ago thing, because it doesn't do anybody any good. That's not having open, honest dialogue. That is regurgitating and dredging up stuff that we really can't have an effect on. It's good from a historical perspective, know where we came from, but let's work on today and the future and how we want to be, and not keep talking about how it was in the past.
We can't continue to fight the same battles we've been fighting all along, and recognize what contributes to these incidents that are highly polarized now, that are highly publicized, because right now breaking news happens within 30 seconds, a minute. It's all over the nation, it's all over the world, And so the challenge then becomes, we can take enough time, we can publicize it rapidly, but do we take enough time so that we can engage one another and grow and learn? That's the challenge. But to me, that's the opportunity.
I would argue, because Jesus came in the flesh, it means that Christians need to deal with things face to face. We can't allow snarkiness on social media. We can't allow slogans. We can't allow loudness and yelling. We've got to look each other in the eye and be accountable for what we say, for asking hard questions, for living with the frustration of that and keeping friendships strong. That's the only way this is going to happen.
I'm a man. I have family. I have children. I have dreams and aspirations, and you do too. So those are the common humanity-based values and attributes that we all have in common. So why can't we exist on that level as opposed to being polarized by what we see, what we hear, what we perceive, what's fed to us, whether it's through the media or whatever. You know, we have got to be engaging one another on a level where we recognize our common humanity, and we all have something in common. We bleed, we breathe, and we die.
We will continue these courageous conversations on race relations on Color 10 News this week. Monday, we're focusing on the role of the church. Tuesday, we look at business. And on Wednesday, we'll look at the role education plays in race relations.
This month, during our series Courageous Conversations, we've taken a look at race relations in America. We've asked important questions like how we got here, why the events in Ferguson were so polarizing, and what's happened with regard to race in Springfield's past. We've talked to a lot of folks locally about these issues, but now we want to get to the action stage.
These conversations are underway in Springfield's spiritual community as part of the Race and Faith Collaborative, which brings together the Council of Churches and civic organizations. Our Nick Thompson introduces us to the tools that they've developed to help you start your own conversation.
When Springfield's Race and Faith Collaborative celebrated its launch on the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech in 2013, it needed a vehicle to drive action toward its goal of unity in the community. So the leaders of the movement started raceandfaith.com.
Raceandfaith.com website was really born out of a movement, if you will, in the Springfield area to really come to understand better what the dynamics of race and race relations are all about, and not just in Springfield. This is obviously not just a Springfield issue or a question or a dynamic.
In 2012, a Smithsonian quality exhibit called Race, Are We So Different?, came here to the Discovery Center. The exhibit looked at race from historical, contemporary, and scientific perspectives. Hundreds of Springfieldians were given a survey asking them their understanding before and after seeing the exhibit. Before, the grade was a D-, after, a C-.
One question in particular was race invented? And many people tend to believe that race is just something that is part of our everyday life, and the whole world is centered around and makes decisions based upon a person's race.
Like any good teacher might tell me if I was not doing so good, if I was getting a D- in a class, a teacher might say to me, "Got a lot of room for improvement, Mark." So this is kind of the approach that we wanted to take, just to say, hey, we're all, you know, a work in progress.
The personal challenge on raceandfaith.com lasts a year. In the first quarter, you're asked to examine yourself. Then you move on to friends and family, places of gathering, and the wider community.
We want to impart the visionary seed, if you will, into people. We want them to develop a personal development process on their own and do that process intentionally.
The first step, self-examination, is tedious and challenging, but it's arguably the most important.
You got to know why you believe what you believe, what causes you to behave one way or another, and who were the sources of that information, or what was the source of that information.
One of my first experiences as a child of seeing racism
On raceandfaith.com, you'll find videos, readings, and tasks to complete in each quarter. The Race and Faith Initiative has brought together congregations like Brentwood Christian Church on the south side of town and Washington Baptist, a predominantly black congregation on the north side. The churches have plans for joint worship services and fellowship events.
Dr. King years ago said that the most segregated time in America is 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday mornings, obviously referring to the churches. And the more we can work together, collaborate together, build partnerships together, the better off it is for everybody in Springfield.
Same beliefs, same God, same Christ, same Holy Spirit. And so we have more in common than not, but it's just being able to come together and express that in our own way of worship and not be so judgmental or so critical of another person's preference of worship.
The Race and Faith Collaborative involves the Council of Churches, but also the city and area colleges. Faith leaders say the website has plenty of resources for secular application.
Whether we are religious or not, I think we can tend to agree that love transcends all boundaries, whether religious or secular, and that love calls us together.
Faith leaders hope by taking the personal challenge, folks in the Ozarks will learn we can live as one people.
The raceandfaith.com website also has a blog with various posts on race issues and how to start a conversation. We'll, of course, post the link to our website, ozarksfirst.com. We'll be right back. Continuing our courageous conversations this morning, in a city with a dominant majority of white citizens, one black business owner says he faces some tough challenges. Our Brett Martin sits down with an owner going outside the box to spread a message against the racial violence across our nation.
Morning after morning, Lyle Foster brews cup after cup inside his espresso cafe.
Many times people have thought that I was the chief cook, the baker, the candlestick maker, and that's all fine, and I get that. But I think it's really been an opportunity to help be part of the entrepreneurial, renaissance.
Foster isn't any of the above. He's the owner of Big Mama's Coffee on Commercial Street.
They'll see me behind the counter. They want to know, do we have barbecue? And I'm kind of like, no, it's a coffee shop, and most times coffee shops don't really serve barbecue.
Like anyone else behind a counter, the Chicago transplant hears both positives and negatives. Still, his mug is always half full.
It's been a very interesting experience. Obviously, there are sometimes I kind of like, wow, this is a different part of the world.
Since 1829, Springfield's been growing. In the early 1900s, the largest grocery stores were owned by the Hardwick brothers, two African Americans, at this spot just off the square downtown. Then in the 1930s, the Grahams ran a barbecue restaurant while helping blacks who were traveling through with a place to stay in a cabin like this one when Springfield hotel rooms wouldn't rent to them because of the color of their skin.
Skin color is no longer the barrier to business that it once was in Springfield, but the city still lacks diversity when it comes to race. Former president of the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce, Jim Anderson.
We are the second most white city in America. I'm not proud of that. Of metropolitan areas above 400,000, we're second only to Portland, Maine.
However, sweeping the past away isn't easy, but Anderson says it has to be done.
You have to have an area, a community that values diversity. You have to have a welcoming community or a welcoming area, but the talent tomorrow is going to be one that's a diverse talent.
Whether it's making changes at your business, creating a plan or program at City Hall, or turning to fine arts, having that conversation is the first step.
Foster says whatever the platform, it's important.
I think it's just helping people to realize people do a variety of things, and we participate in any number of different type of business ventures, not always hair salons and barbecue restaurants.
Every Friday and Saturday night in February, Foster opens his back porch theater for entertainment with a real message.
I really feel that helping to explain to people the rights, the privileges that we all enjoy, that for some communities we had to fight, we had to march, we had to protest, we had to speak up.
The late Auguste Boal, founder of the Theater of the Oppressed, famously said, theater is a rehearsal for the future. It's a rehearsal for life.
John Herbert directs Rites to Passage, a fictional story surrounding similar racial tensions to current events like Ferguson.
The white thief or the dead black kid presumed to be the thief.
It's about an hour-long feature-length one-act that involves a white police officer who has just shot and killed a black teenager.
He was a good kid. Want to be a lawyer someday.
Herbert believes the stage is the starting point to a conversation not always easily discussed.
I don't get to use a more intimate version of, oh, one of my best friends is black version.
It gives us this space to say, hey, here's what people are thinking and feeling. Here's what people want to say, but don't want to say. And we can all look at it. It's fiction. We're all okay. Now let's talk about it.
On a cold morning, black coffee in a white mug isn't just a way of revenue. It's a constant reminder of a successful combination for Foster. Two colors existing together, dependent on one another. Now he hopes it'll break through the walls of his coffee shop to the streets of Springfield.
You don't have to prove to me that, that you're fair. I mean, I assume that I'm not looking at you thinking, you know, you hate me or you've got prejudice and bias against. I'm looking at you as another traveler on the journey called life. So let's walk down the road together.
The Rites of Passage will run next week and on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. To learn more about the play and hear more of our courageous conversations on Ferguson and race in Springfield, you can find that under this story on our website, Ozarks. Continuing our courageous conversations this morning, our school systems are where the future begins. So how do local schools deal with diversity here in Springfield? Matt Lupoli reports the district's message is one of inclusion through engagement.
There is a lack of diversity, however, that is increasing on a number of different levels, and I find that particularly exciting.
It's an old adage that shines with new truth. Children are our future. So for a glimpse at Springfield's tomorrow, we can look at its schools today.
Maybe Springfield is getting more diverse if you look at the school district. Would that be correct?
Oh, I would agree with that. I mean, there's statistical trends showing that our students of color are slightly increasing year after year. I mean, we almost had 1% of increase in our students of color since last year. You know, even though we're at a little bit over 20%, I mean, but nationally the things tell you that that's probably going to continue to keep changing. I believe when I applied for the job and was looking, it was around 16 and a half. So you're talking about less than 3 years ago.
Numbers of students who aren't white in Springfield schools are growing, but the data still shows smaller rates than similar cities.
Even like Des Moines or Tulsa, their student demographics are much larger. Probably over more than 50% of their students are students of color in their district. In the younger age groups is definitely where you see a great more deal of the diversity emerging. Probably more so north to center Springfield tends to be more diverse. But I think that's just it's going to continue to change as they go through life to help prepare them for what's going to be out there, unless they're going to be sheltered all of their lives and not be a part of anything.
That's part of growth too.
It is. Yeah. Very much so. You know, there's benefits of being connected with someone who may have different experiences, who may not be like you.
Education advocates in and outside the district say reaching out to diverse students is an investment in their futures and the community on the whole.
Creating different levels of engagement for students, you know, and really the main reason is because, you know, a lot of the research has shown that there is an achievement gaps from students who are African American and Hispanic compared to their white counterparts. And so how do you close that gap?
Parents have to be the role models. We have to engage in our public school system. Our schools need to understand diversity and the value of diversity.
You have to be strategic. You have to be budget conscious in supporting those students and their families and truly engaging them as partners in the educational process, because it's good for the district. And of course, what's really good for the district, I mean truly good for the district, is good for the community. With the opening of the community school at Robertson and things of that sort, I think have said we need to take a more wraparound approach to education. It doesn't just start here when the school bell rings and end here at the end of the day when that other bell rings.
It's through partnerships that the district tells us helps foster community engagement and exposure for students of color.
It's so ideal, it's not even funny. Springfield does a very good job, if it wants to, in partnering and collaborating with other entities if they're thinking about it a little bit.
Programs with the NAACP, Missouri State University, and Drury University do just that.
Getting them in a place where they feel that college is something that I can do. This is, even though I live in Springfield and I know of Missouri State, but I can actually be a student here and be a part of this campus as opposed to kind of being on the outside looking in.
Another new inclusion program just started this year called the Brother to Brother program. That'll help high school boys of any color aspire to do better through a mentoring program with successful college students and adults in the community.